Hello everyone, welcome to another session on Dalit writing. Today we'll discuss Module 6, which is also the last module in this paper. Module 6 comprises fiction. It's mostly novels and short stories. And I have divided Module 6 into two parts, Part 1 and Part 2. This is Part 1, and in Part 1 we look at the first two novels, and in Part 2 we'll look at the rest of the two novels and two short stories. So that's how the division goes. In Part 1, today we'll look at two novels. The first one by Potheri Kunjambu, which is titled Saraswati Vijayam, and the second novel is by Gogu Shyamala, which is titled Father May Be an Elephant and Mother Only a Small Basket, But. Yes, it's a very tricky sort of a title. So let's see how these novels go. Also, please remember the history that we have traced all these while when we were looking at different kinds of genres like autobiography, poetry, prose, etc. Because every time you take up a writing, a Dalit writing, a piece of Dalit writing, it is very important to remember the milestones Dalit movement has covered and the consequent Dalit writings that have come up. So it's very important that you always connect them with the piece of writing that you are studying now. So if you're looking at fiction now, it's important. It's equally important to remember the Dalit movements. Everything, all these things started with those powerful Dalit movements. So it's important and it's significant to remember them before you start analyzing a short story or a novel or a poem. So let's begin with the first novel, Saraswati Vijayam by Potheri Kunjambu. A lawyer by profession, Potheri Kunjambu was the legal advisor to the Chirakkal royal family. He was a social reformer and believed that education is the right tool for anyone to come up in life. 3 years after the publication of Chandu Menon's Indulekha, Potheri Kunjambu wrote a novel titled Saraswati Vijayam. As the title suggests, the novel centers around the importance of education in one's life. Unfortunately, the work did not become popular like its predecessor, probably because it lacked the literary finesse that's expected of a novel. However, one cannot ignore the social critique it offers, and a timeless one at that. Kunjambu was born in a Thiya community in Kannur, and he became a social reformer owing to the social conditions of his time. He was an educated man, and he started an elementary school at Chova and a pallikudam for children belonging to the lower caste. Kunjambu is also credited with the establishment of a printing press called Edward Press in Kannur that published books which critiqued Hinduism. He was anguished at the way the religion treated its followers. He went on to write a pamphlet titled Tiyar in 1908. In this pamphlet, he claimed conversion as another way to escape the injustices of the caste system. Now, when it comes to the story Saraswati Vijayam, it begins with a Nambudiri giving an order to kill a Pulaya man. The entire novel is centered around these two characters, a Nambudiri and a Pulaya man. Now, the Nambudiri gives an order to kill the Pulaya man because he dared to sing a song in his vicinity. But he survives, and the novel thus begins at a very crucial point which grabs the attention of the audience. The novel then follows course of the journey both the characters take up, a journey of salvation. The Nambudiri decides to travel to Kashi, believed to be one of the holiest pilgrimage sites of Hindus. His aim is to cleanse himself of all pride, arrogance, and ignorance. On the other hand, the Pulaya man also embarks on a journey of salvation. but it's different from that of the Nambudiri. He decides to undergo salvation or attain salvation through education. It was a time when a number of Christian missionaries were slowly spreading their influence throughout the land and they upheld education. The Pulaya man benefits from the colonial education as well as Christianity when he converts himself to Christianity. In the end, tables are turned. The Pulaya man, who is educated now, goes on to become a judge. And as a play of fate, he presides over the trial of the Nambudiri. Not just that, he even goes on to marry his granddaughter Saraswati. The author has even added an epitaph to his novel that upheld his philosophy. Education is the greatest of all wealth. The novel might lack in the literary finesse that's normally expected of a literary work, but it definitely offers a social critique of the times and does not fail to give us a clear picture of the kind of ostracization experienced by the Dalits. Though it failed to become a mainstream literary work of those times, the fact that it's read and performed today on stage is a testimony to its timeless relevance of its theme. This work was translated to English by historian Dilip Menon. One must also not forget the fact that Potheri Kunjambu advocated for emancipation of Dalits through education, and he went out of his way practicing what he preached. Years later, it was the same philosophy put forward by one of the greatest personalities in Dalit movement, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Ambedkar also believed that education and conversion, he himself converted to Buddhism, will make emancipation possible for Dalits. Therefore, this novel is relevant and timeless for the social critique it offered of those times, and it is still relevant today because a lot hasn't changed even today. So, this novel, despite lacking a lot of literary finesse, stands relevant. The novel works as a reminder to all of us how the past has treated Dalits. Imagine a man being killed just because he sang a song of his choice. How unfair can it get? One must understand the kind of unfair lives Dalits led. They were not even allowed to nurture their interest. A life of dignity sounds like a distant dream. Today, things have changed undoubtedly, but there is more to be done, and therefore the fight continues. And it's here Dalit writings and Dalit literature gain significance. So now let's move on to the second novel titled Father May Be an Elephant and Mother Only a Small Basket, but written by Gogu Shyamala. Before we move on, a word about the author. Gogu Shyamala is a prominent Dalit feminist writer in Telugu. When she speaks about her experiences as a Dalit, she says, quote, I never realized that there was any discrimination as a kid. It was after growing up that I discovered it. Quote unquote. Also, in her family, she is the only one of her three siblings who obtained education. As a student, she was a leader in college and a very active one, and she joined the Communist Party of India but parted with them following the Sundar massacre. She then started reading Ambedkar voraciously and realized the depth of the roots of casteism in India. She says that even today, if there is any Dalit parliamentarian, it is only because of reservation. Clearly a bold and outspoken personality, Goku Shyamala was at the forefront speaking for Rohit Vemula, a Dalit student who committed suicide at the University of Hyderabad. She also represents Anveshi and Dalit Women's Forum in the World Conference Against Racism in Durban in the year 2001. She is a member of the executive committee of Anveshi, where she is creating biographies of significant Dalit female political leaders. Another important project she is part of is the Oxfam funded research project on domestic violence and Dalit women. Her work, Father May Be an Elephant and Mother Only a Small Basket, but is considered one of the finest works in Telugu Dalit literature, and she is often lauded for the oral quality in her works. This work was part of her project titled Dalit Women's Biographies. Her other famous works of fiction include Tataki Wins Again and Brave Heart Badaya, and her contribution to non-fiction include Nena Balanni, T.N. Sadalakshmi Batuka Katha, Gender Consciousness in Dalit Women's Literature, etc. So, as we come to a close of part one, I would like to remind you that we'll be looking at this issue, the violence, the domestic violence and oppression faced by Dalit women within their communities. We'll be looking at it in more detail in the coming two novels. And I want you all to understand and realize the fact that how things have progressed as we completed each module in this paper, because when we began the modules we spoke about general aspects of Dalit movements in Dalit literature, how it came into being, how Dalits in general were humiliated and insulted. But as we come to a close, we understand that the exploitation and the problems are not something that's limited to the outside of their communities, but this is something that's prevalent within the communities as well. And who's a victim? It's always a women who bear the brunt of all these tortures and humiliation. So we'll be looking at this issue in more detail, a topic, a theme that Gogu Shyamala has been really vocal about in all her works, the theme of domestic violence and how women are silenced.